Hello, everyone. My name is Rose Ross, and I'm the founder and chief trailblazer of the TechTrailblazers Awards. And I'm here for a Judges on Fire podcast recording with one of our brand spanking new judges, Ian Ellis from the Enterprise Tech Meetup. Hello, Ian.
Hi, Rose. How's it going?
It's great. Thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good.
Fantastic. So, Ian, we've worked together for a number of years, and I've attended your events. You've been involved with Tech Trailblazers in a very informal basis, sharing that with your very extensive network of startups, VCs, and other people a part of the ecosystem. So we're delighted that you're coming on board to share your expertise and your insights when reviewing all of our lovely entrants. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to
it. Good. So I think it'd be great for the audience to understand a little bit more about you. So talk a little bit perhaps about, your journey into this crazy world of enterprise tech startups.
So if I roll back the clock to when I graduated college, there used to be a saying in Ireland that if you graduated, I did economics, and if you graduated with any course, you'd end up in IT, and this is Ireland in the 90s. So everyone ended up in IT. So I ended up in IT working in Ireland. I worked for a now defunct building society called Irish Nationwide, and then Bank of Ireland. And then I decided to move to London for a year to do a master's, and I stayed. So I've been in London since 2003 with a little stop-off hiatus for a few years in New York. I did a master's at the London School of Economics, then ended up at Morgan Stanley, where I worked in a great team, very unusual team that was called Technology Business Development. We sat between IT and the front office businesses, thinking about how clients are customers and customers are vendors and all that grey area in between, and how to manage the grey area and really help with relationships while adhering to all the compliance rules. So very interesting space. When you talk with a CFO in a tech company, they don't recognize information barriers. So the fact that, you could be buying a router of Cisco at the same time as Morgan Stanley banker selling Cisco a bond is completely lost to the CFO. So it's a very interesting spot. Spent about 12 years working there. A lot of that is to do with innovation, because it's often to do with emerging companies coming into and how they engage with the likes of a Morgan Stanley. So I helped run the CTO Summit and Tech Week, which was Morgan Stanley's big innovation outreach program that happened on an annual basis in the West Coast. It was crazy. It was brilliant. It was like being sheep dipped into technology for a week. You'd spend, as the planner, you'd run it, and the organizer, you'd spend 6 months planning it for all the senior executives inside technology at Morgan Stanley, from the CIO down to their directs. And we'd bring 70 to 80 people out to the West Coast and sheep dip them in technology for a week. It was a massive offsite. Really interesting what you'd hear, everything from the very cutting edge stuff to what, the vendors you're working with, and the hyperscalers and all the major players you're working with on a week to week basis. So that was really, really instrumental in sort of my love of working with emerging technology. You might have noticed that I don't use the word startups. I tend to think of emerging technology companies because I think the word startup to me doesn't feel like it makes it feel like too much of, hanging around in the kitchen and putting something together. This is actually, I care about companies that are building businesses and real opportunities. So after Morgan Stanley, I worked with Microsoft at the accelerator there for a couple of years in Microsoft Ventures, and working between corporate clients and the accelerators and helping to bridge that gap. So that was super interesting. And then I spent about 5 years at Deutsche Bank running their tech business development team, which was a great, very interesting project to see it across two different banks. After that, I did a bit of time at Prudential Financial, working in the emerging technologies team there. It was great to get into insurance, to learn something new, similar but different to financial services, to core financial services. And so it was great to understand how the markets differ and learn some new things that were, what do insurers care about, and particularly life insurers in this case. So learning all about, and I'd studied health economics, so learning all about how technology plays into that, in terms of, behavioral science and all that type of stuff was super interesting. So spent a year or so doing that, and then went freelance, and I've been freelance since then. So I do three things now. I do a bit of research. So I help companies when they're bringing products to market or entering new markets. So I'll work with companies. If it's a security company, I'll work with my network of CISOs, of people I know in security, help them test their product market fit through a process of interviews and understanding how does it all work and what's the opportunities in that market. I also do the events we talked a little bit, you mentioned at the start. So I do a couple of things here. I run the London Enterprise Tech Meetup. It's been going for about 12 years now. So someone described it as the best meetup nobody's ever heard of. We get about 130 people a month. So we're filling out, we collaborate with the London Stock Exchange to run it there. And we get 130 people a month, which is a sellout audience. We do 10 events a year. And really, we're focused on different topics in enterprise tech every month. So last month, we did one around financial services and AI. The month before was cybersecurity, superheroes in cybersecurity. The month before that was data. The month before that was identity and privacy. So a different topic every month. And you get a nice mix of the audience, tech practitioners, entrepreneurs, investors, and academia. And generally, your regular attendees are people who have a healthy interest in learning, because it's a different topic every month and everything's aligned along the topic. People who come every month want to, round out their skills and make sure they know the latest trends going on in AI or security or data and so you'll get a core of people who come through every month and are continuously learning. And then you have a group of people who come through different months based on the theme. So we get a nice mix in the audience. A mix of senior to juniors, everything from college students through to CIOs. So it's a really nice, healthy mix. I do some other things as well here and there, which is kind of fun.
So I think we should talk about one of those because it's quite timely. So a little birdie, well, I'm lying, it's not a little birdie, but I know that you do something really kind of fun. And I think you kicked it off around RSA, so around one of the leading cyber events. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about your insider schedule. What is that and how did that come about? And obviously there is going to be one, I believe, for Black Hat, which is coming up.
Yeah, there's one coming up for Hacker Summer Camp, which is DevCon, Black Hat and B-Sides. They're all happening in Las Vegas at the start of August. Well, 8th of August, I think, start. Round about there. So how it came about is kind of a fun story. So when I was at Morgan Stanley, I used to run the field, let's call it a field trip, the executive trip out to RSA every year for the CISO and the CISO's direct team to meet with current current vendors, also to see new emerging technologies coming through. And basically, for those who've not been in some of those rooms, you basically go from RSA, you walk up the hill to 101 California, and you go and meet a group of security professionals who are sitting in a room and have been locked in that room for 10 hours a day, meeting companies every hour for 10 hours a day. And it's kind of intense. But one of the things I noticed, and we sort of always had difficulty with, was there are too many things going on at RSA. So not even the conference itself, the fringe. So at RSA this year, just gone back in 2024, May, I think there was the guts of 200 fringe events. And that happens in a 4-day period. Yeah.
Wow. That's nuts.
And so there are lots of ways to try and work it out. But for time-starved executives, what tends to happen is they tend to, what I call the lowest, choose the lowest common denominator events, the things that they get pestered most about, or they just go, oh, I'll just go to that because it's a drinks thing and sure, it'll be fine. And, and so they end up in some sweaty nightclub with 2,000 other random people, when actually it's for what their goals are with going to the likes of an RSA or Black Hat. You want to align what you do around the fringes of the event with your goals more. And quite a lot of people never make it to the floor of RSA or Black Hat. They just don't. They're tied up in meetings, or they're at VC events, or they're at banking events, or they're at, or different things are going on. So they're at product launches or whatever. And there's a huge industry that goes on around the conference. And so the diaspora around the conference is super interesting.
Well, it's like I don't want to say subculture, because that's not right.
No, it's the fringe. It's like any big conference is a fringe. You'll see it at AWS reInvent. I'm sure you'll see it at Salesforce's big conference. You see it at RSA. You're really seeing it at Black Hat this year. So Black Hat, for any of the security folks going to Black Hat, Wednesday, I'm going to say just on Wednesday, there's 55 events happening on Wednesday. And
55?
Just on the Wednesday.
And do you think that's all of them? Do you think there are other ones that you just aren't even aware of?
There'll be undoubtedly there'll be events I've missed. But that I've just been able to map. Like, one of the nice things about the insider schedule is normally people get these in lists, or they get, those, or they hear about them, they have them in random emails. What this does is it gives you a visual representation of each day. So you see on a big sheet of paper, essentially, block by block, hour by hour, because this is how we used to plan Tech Week and all these sort of innovation events.
Right, okay,
hour by hour, what's going on, where should I be, what's the best use of my time, hour by hour. And so it gives you some really good insights, like for our VC friends who are maybe listening or watching this. The Black Hat example is I think the 7 VC events all happening within a 4-hour space of time on the Wednesday. And you're like, why would so how you think differently. So when I flip it on its head and talk about the event planners and people who are planning this stuff, the schedule is really useful to them to work out next year. Am I going to put something on the Wednesday or maybe the Tuesday instead, when like Tuesday is probably only 20 events. So it's like almost a third of the events happening on the Tuesday compared to the Wednesday.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, those are two great examples of where, cybersecurity, emerging technology organizations, startups, focus very heavily their activities, both from their marketing efforts, putting, money into stand, doing lots of PR, working with the analysts there, obviously trying to woo, some corporates, possibly woo some money out of the VC's back pockets as well. And, those pockets are relatively deep. So what are you seeing? Obviously you were at RSA earlier in the year. What are you starting to see? What are the conversations that you're hearing? What are the trends that you're seeing? Let's just take cyber as an example. And, obviously you can talk about whether it fits into the wider ecosystem.
So there were 3 big things. So RSA was interesting this year. I'm going to say it was interesting because nothing big was said. So but
I think a few people might disagree with you on that one.
Possibly.
that they said some big things, right?
But where they heard is the question.
It's always a good question, right?
So the way I think about it is looking at culturally at RSA this year. There were 3 things I noticed. One was that everyone was glad to be there. It was just the business is back. And so while there were when I say nothing big was said, there was no, oh my God moment. Yeah. But there was this feeling of business being done, which was, so there was a very positive vibe around it this year. And certainly around all the fringe events, a hugely positive vibe. 3 things came out of it really. One is that, like, let's loosely use the term the CISO. The CISO they still haven't got their head around the blocking and tackling of ransomware or the challenges they're facing around resilience. And we've seen in the last few, recently with CrowdStrike, like resilience and ransomware and that stuff is still keeping people up at night. And it's still a major problem. It's the thing I think people think will get them fired. So that's the sort of, let's call it the business as usual piece. The second piece that was interesting is looking forward piece. Nobody really knows what to make of AI. And when I say that, I mean the AI, AI in security. So the use of AI in security products, but also securing AI. So I think that's a big unknown for people right now. I can understand why, because basically you've got 2 markets that are moving. You've got the security market and the AI market, and they're both dynamic right now. And so when 2 things are moving dynamically, it's really hard to pin a flag down on something. And so I think that's something that people are consciously thinking about and I bet all of their business stakeholders like, let's use AI, yay! And so I think there's a challenge that the security people and the CISOs are beginning to think, how do I manage expectations here? And how do I manage my data so it's not getting rolled out into a large language model like ChatGPT and being indexed and disappearing, never to be seen again, because nobody knows how ChatGPT is going to do like the right to be forgotten and things like this. Or if data gets exfiltrated into ChatGPT, how do you get it back? You don't get it back out again. It gets built into a model, and then the model factors that in, and like So there's a whole load of unknown sitting around that stuff. And I think that's a big area. I think there's some things are noise and some are signal. And I think that's really a big question for people. The other thing, which goes back to noise and signal, and you mentioned it a bit when you talked about taking stands earlier, there was one big cultural thing at RSA this year, and it revolved around Palo Alto networks. So they whether it's controversial or not, they sell, they're big businesses, firewalls. They sell firewalls, that. So they have a view that, and I'm guessing, they have a view that no CISO is going to walk the floor and buy a firewall on the floor. So they don't take a stand. And right. So what they do, though, is they plow tons of money into other things. So I think they released an ad with Keanu Reeves that week that made a load of noise. They hired a ninja flash mob who rushed all over RSA and made loads of noise. And then they did the big thing that's always the talk of RSA is they run a very small gig for a very small number of CISOs. So I think it was 150 people this year got to see Duran Duran live. Wow. So it's kind of crazy. And it's always the talk of RSA. It's like, well, how did you hear? What did Palo Alto do this year?
Secret club, isn't it?
Secret club, highly exclusive. So, but it's interesting, back to your sort of talking about marketing strategies, it's like they've cut their cloth to suit their needs. And they very much, while they go to be in San Francisco at that time, they're very much, moving and shaking in a different vibe to the conference itself. Mm. So those are the three big things I've noticed, two technical, one sort of more cultural.
Mm. And it certainly is true that there is as you say, with the insider schedule, there's lots of stuff. And some of those people, like Palo Alto, are not on the show floor. Right? So they put in the efforts into the kind of the extracurricular activities, the social elements, maybe some, I know that IO Active, one of our, Jennifer is one of our judges, and they do an awful lot of stuff, educational stuff. They run almost like, I think it's the IO Oasis, which is not actually on the show floor. It's somewhere nearby.
It's pretty fun at midnight, I think, isn't it?
Midnight, the Iron Oasis. Very good. I'll have to mention that to her. I think that could be the next marketing campaign.
Good.
The next marketing campaign. So, obviously we're recording this just before Black Hat. So, it'd be interesting to see if there's any updates post that. But like you say, the vibe at RSA early in the year was very much, not return to normal, but we're back in business because obviously the whole pandemic hit. Literally, I was at the 2020. I believe it was 2020? Yeah, 2020.
2020, yeah.
RSA, no blimmin' 2020.
Two people had COVID and everyone lost their minds. It was like, there was 50,000 people in San Francisco at it, and I think 2 people picked up COVID at it. We speak about COVID in a very different way these days. But at the time, it was obviously scary, but the 2 people unfortunately got it, and everybody, I think everybody lost their minds, and it was like there were physical security teams being pulled in to check if people need to be isolated, all this crazy stuff happening. I remember being at an RSA event. I was with I was visiting Deutsche Bank that week because I was freelance at that stage, but I was at an RSA event, and the receptionist had a terrible cold. And I thought to myself, oh no, it's like because COVID was just in the news.
Is it or isn't it?
Is it or isn't it? It was like there was a lot of, that was the COVID RSA right before the world lockdown.
Yeah. So it was a very strange time to have come out of the buzz of that and then come into the what happened next type of thing, which nobody could have envisaged. So, that we've talked about RSA, we've talked about the insider schedule and a lot of your credentials. Obviously, we've worked together on a number of things sort of for clients and such like. So tell me what you see as the tech trailblazers and why it's something you'd like, you've decided to finally get involved with. And it isn't just me twisting your arm every time I see you to get involved.
So I think it was a couple of years ago, I'm going to say 2 or 3 years ago, we did, actually maybe even longer, because COVID, you sort of go into that memory lapse of time.
Yeah, for sure.
We did an event with the Enterprise Tech Meetup where we had some of the tech trailblazing companies profiled. And
showcase.
They came in person. I think it was at ARIC when we were still doing events at ARIC. And I think we did. I think 4 or 5 companies where Trailblazers were showcased.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, wow, these are really good companies and really interesting what they're doing, innovative. And I thought, this is interesting. And it's been a couple of years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, that's interesting. I must see about how we can get more involved at some point. And now, the circle of life has come around. Like, I think it's interesting to, like, getting involved with understanding more about companies at a deeper level. I like to understand when I'm, put the effort in from judging anything to understand at the deeper level, not just the technology, but the business and why they're doing what they're doing. And so having the opportunity to do that, like I spent a lot of time with the FinTech Innovation Lab, which is run by Accenture. And so, and that's involved a lot of mentoring and working with companies, and also watching how the industry selects and what they think is interesting. So a lot of these conversations, while the judging, it's interesting to see the companies, it's also hearing what your peer judges are saying. What do they care about? What do they not care about? How are they thinking about the world? So there's a huge amount you can learn from these things. I think it's really valuable to get engaged with companies and understand how they're doing and, see the next generation of great companies coming through.
Yeah. And you mentioned your network of CISOs. I mean, you run another club, or you're involved with another club that is CISOs who invest, so on an angel basis. So it'd be interesting to see what they see and, mapping that against it. So obviously the other area that you get very involved with, and we have spoken about that recently, is the whole VC view of the world and corporates view of the world. The IT directors, the CIOs, the CISOs, everything like that. Is there anything that you want to say around that you think might be insightful for some of the guys that are listening in from emerging technology?
So I think what's interesting about this, and I'll give you the story. I was at an event recently where I was working with, there was a group of South American banks that were coming over, and I was speaking at a thing. And I was on a sort of round table with some folks talking about Gen AI. And we had a couple of emerging tech CEOs there. So likes of Miriam from Titan ML, those types of folks, super insightful, really ahead of the market. And then there was also a couple of folks from different banks from South America. And then in addition to that, there was a couple of VCs. And what's interesting is, and this is kind of reinforces what you see with the hype cycle, I guess, is that where the VCs are very much thinking about skating to where the puck is going to be. Yeah. Whereas I think if you're a CIO or if you're working on a day-to-day practically in technology, you're sort of you're skating with.
But view is a lot closer to you, right?
A lot closer. It's a lot.
The thing that's about to hit you on the head, or the thing that
exactly
your business. Yeah.
And I think so. They're very much practically thinking about what they're deploying now, and they're not necessarily thinking beyond Horizon 2, let's say. So they're thinking definitely Horizon 1, maybe a little bit of Horizon 2, but they're thinking about, because the thing with, I'm guessing they're being in an operationally focused job, you know, things will blow you up far quicker than the thing that's, 3 years down the road. So, but what's interesting is all the VCs, how they think about the world is 3 years down the road. Yeah. And it becomes like you think about, and when you think about large players versus emerging companies, this becomes interesting because what is an actual trend versus what is maybe a feature. And then also, when I look and I watch closely the likes of when Microsoft comes out with its product announcements or Salesforce or someone like that, because we have this phrase at Microsoft when I was at the accelerator is there's a risk of roadmap kill. Mm-hmm. So if you're building something and you're in an emerging company, if you're 2 phases ahead, you're a lot safer place than you're 1 phase ahead. So the minute the monster starts catching up on you, you're in trouble because you could instantly become something that they sort of build themselves. And so it's like, how do you make sure you stay far enough ahead while also solving the requirements of a group of people who are thinking in the here and now and not in Horizon 2? Does that make sense? It's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah. That's quite a conflicted position to be in. Yeah. Because you need to find the right balance.
And I suppose you can argue that, someone like a Microsoft coming into your market means there's a market, which is a good thing. But it's like, how do you?
Yeah,
like,
but you still don't probably want that unless you want.
Well, yeah.
Thoughts, right? Because you've got.
Like, I'll give you a good example. I'm invested in a company called Magic Orange, and they would be a big Aptio competitor. And Aptio just got acquired about a year or so ago. Got acquired by IBM, and so how does that change the dynamics of their industry and their market? It's a super interesting question because they're all in the ITFM space, so IT financial management. They do similar things. And it's just very interesting because suddenly your whole world changes because now you're competing with IBM. But on the flip side, that's good and bad because it's bad because you're competing with a giant behemoth who's already got customers on speed dial and got account executives in every major Fortune 500. On the flip side, not everyone will want to work with IBM when it's around their financial management information. Especially for IT, you don't necessarily want to give that sensitive information away to like an IBM. So those are the sort of conflicting questions I'm sure that a lot of CIOs think about, and a lot of CEOs like David, who's the CEO of Magic Orange, is probably thinking, what's my opportunity here? What's my risk and what's my opportunity? So how you think about all that stuff is super interesting.
Yeah. So for the people who are entering, for the organizations that are entering, and obviously you can talk into, a good number of the tech categories, you obviously would be well positioned to, give views on our investment trailblazers. So looking at VCs, governments, accelerators, those type of people, and looking how they're contributing to the ecosystem. I know you've done a lot around diversity, and I'm not going to start the conversation about all the great work you've been doing around women in tech and women in business. Maybe we'll do a follow-up on. But that's certainly an area that you can talk about. And sort of evaluating at great length, and obviously as the individual. So let's just focus on the categories as a whole. What would you like to see? What's going to make you get excited if you see something in an application or an entry, should I say, not an application?
So if I see something in an entry that would excite me, I think understanding how they're pragmatically solving problems. So we talked about being too far. So there's always a timing question here. So there's a risk of being too far ahead. I'll give you an example. I was talking to someone recently about quantum computing, and I was like, "Well, that's great. It's a couple of years away." And there's investment going into it now, but I don't think very many people have quantum computers. Like you've got, I'm sure there's DoD and a few other people, but like D-Waves don't fly off the shelves. And it's a very niche area right now, but it will be transformative when it comes. And I think it's got a big role to play with AI because of the way quantum computing works and the amount of power we're currently putting into building large language models in terms of energy, like physical electricity. So I think there's a huge question there about that long term. But I've sort of gone off on a bit of a tangent. But I think, being able to practically solve a problem for people who need it solved, while also being far enough ahead that you've got enough vision. And I think that when you look at, thinking about different categories, so like I'm thinking about end user computing, what's happening in spatial computing? Is there anything interesting going on there? We saw the Apple Vision Pro come out, like how's that world changing? Post-COVID, end user computing is a very different place than pre-COVID. So what's coming next? How's that world changed in the working from home world? If I think about security, it's like, as we said, the security of AI and the AI of security. And then, of course, AI and everything. So I'm sure that you're going to hear the word AI a lot.
Yeah, AI and cyber are our biggest categories for tech. Yeah. So for sure, that will be something we'll be expecting to be, will continue. And, AI in everything as well. Because some people, there's a little bit of AI washing, there is
just a bit.
There is. I'm not the best person to gauge how washy it gets. However, I do know there are a lot of technology offerings already in play that had already been utilizing that capability, but not really making too much of a thing about it. Automation is a big thing in so many elements, and AI can play a role in that.
Yeah. But I think there is an element of, when you think about automation, and I might be a bit contrarian now I think about this, but I think about like RPA and automation as just an extension of citizen development. When I think about that, I'm thinking about, you could argue automation, well, let's call it RPA, automation, low code, no code, bucketed loosely. You could argue that all started back when we had Microsoft Access and VBA and Excel. And all that's happening now is that, the products are getting stronger and better and faster. And it's
more
just
accessible
an extension. Yeah. And I think that there's a massive opportunity in that space. The problem we have with a lot of the providers, automation providers, is they give you, if you're a CIO, your biggest fear is your next mainframe. It's your spaghetti code. It's things you can't unwind. And so the problem you have is that a lot of the providers provide you on-ramps and no off-ramps. It's
been a big conversation with the cloud, wasn't it, for a long time?
Yeah, exactly.
Locked
is
in.
The cloud your next mainframe is a huge question, And so I think what you're seeing is my view anyway, is that if you're a CIO and you embrace, automation as a way, because if I'm a CIO, I've got a certain budget. I have a lot of stakeholders, and I never have enough budget to satisfy all my stakeholders. But if I can enable, in a controlled manner, an army of people who build things for themselves, and then those things are good enough till we can build something properly for them, or they're good enough forever, potentially. But the question is how you manage and govern them if they're forever tools. And if they're not forever tools, it's how you move off them elegantly. And I think that those are the unanswered questions in a lot of these spaces. And I think that will make a difference, I think, over time.
Brilliant. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we go?
I think I'm a big fan of pragmatic innovation. And what I mean by that is if you're going to do things in a team, if you're going to, innovation needs to be done by the whole organization, firstly. At Morgan Stanley, we were huge believers that everybody innovated. And what happens is you may have people that facilitate or drive alignment or direction, but it doesn't happen over there in a little room. I remember being in an organization once and someone coming to me said, we're going to hire in some consultants to run our innovation practice. And I'm like, that's the worst thing you could do, because firstly, you're taking the most interesting job in the organization and outsourcing it. Secondly, you've a load of people, if you want to upskill your organization, you're seeing a big trend of insourcing now where people are bringing back in capabilities. Yeah. The best way to do that is give the most interesting jobs to the people inside. And then also you want the people to be connected to the businesses and what you do on a daily basis. So having a third party drive it, conversations and move things forward for you, but you need in-house capability as well. I think it's super important. And I think you need to have strong metrics, have a clear idea what you're aligning to, and align from top to bottom in the organization. So culturally, I think that's how I think about those type of things. I think it has to be very pragmatic. I'm not a big believer in ivory towers or skunk works. I think depending on the scenario, they may be valuable, but I think most innovation is people making their jobs a bit better every day and making what they do a bit more efficient. And then there's a chunk of it that's disruptive. And sometimes that falls out of the iterative just accidentally. So that's, it's the Post-it note thing. Post-it notes came about because the glue that they used for them was designed to stick other stuff together and wasn't strong enough. So then that's where the Post-it note came from. So those types of things.
Becomes a success, right?
Exactly. And that's the other piece, is how you think about failure, and failure not being a dirty word, but how you manage it in an appropriate way.
Exactly. Well, it's been fascinating. I mean, I know that we could probably talk for a lot longer. But maybe we'll do a follow-up some stage. Maybe we'll catch up. We will definitely catch up in person at some stage too. So thank you so much, Ian. It's always a pleasure to see you. Always a pleasure to get some insights into your world. And myself and the team are delighted that you're able to join us this year. And we look forward to sharing all the great entries with you over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, it's going to be an adventure. I'm looking forward to it.
It will be fun. Thanks, Ian, again. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully you've found some little pearls of wisdom. I think there were plenty in that conversation. So We look forward to speaking with you again soon. This was the Judges on Fire for the Tech Trailblazers podcast. You can find us at www.techtrailblazers.com, at TechTrailblaze on X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can also find us if you search for Tech Trailblazers on LinkedIn. We look forward to your questions and hopefully lots of your entries. Thank you again. Goodbye.